She was the first America's sweetheart, the most powerful woman in Hollywood, and a cinematic goddess. But Mary Pickford was a liar. Behind the golden curls and the innocent smile lived a woman drowning in domestic abuse, secret alcoholism, and a desperate need for control. She built an empire on a fantasy, but her reality was a living nightmare. From the highest-paid actress in history to a reclusive shut-in, this is the tragic true story of the woman who owned Hollywood, then lost herself. To understand how a woman could possess everything yet feel absolutely nothing, we have to strip away the million-dollar contracts and the legendary parties at Pickford. We need to travel back in time, long before the lights of Hollywood flickered on, to a cold reality in Toronto where Mary Pickford wasn't a goddess, but a starving child named Gladys Smith. You see, the hunger for fame usually stems from a literal hunger, and Mary's early life was defined by a terrifying proximity to the gutter. Her story didn't begin with applause. It began with abandonment. Her father left the family in a precarious position, and his subsequent death didn't bring relief, but absolute devastation. Her mother, Charlotte, was left with nothing but grief and 3 children to feed. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was a life where disease and poverty were constant roommates. At one point, the family was quarantined by health authorities, treated like biological hazards rather than human beings. That kind of shame leaves a scar that no amount of money can ever surgically remove. Desperation forced Charlotte to turn their home into a boarding house, and it was here that fate walked through the door in the form of a stage manager. He needed a child for a play, and little Gladys, soon to be Mary, was thrust onto the stage. She wasn't acting for art, she was acting for survival. Known then as Baby Gladys, she became the breadwinner, touring with her family in cheap, shady theater companies across America. They were vagabonds, sleeping on trains and eating when they could, but something in Mary was hardening. While her siblings, Lottie and Jack, were dragged along for the ride, Mary became the engine. She possessed a terrifying level of ambition for a child. She realized early on that her angelic face and golden ringlets were currency, and she intended to spend them to buy her family out of misery. By the time she was a teenager, she wasn't just a participant. She was a calculator. She looked at the stage and realized it wasn't enough. She wanted the glitter of Broadway, and she gave herself an ultimatum. If she didn't make it big by a certain age, she would quit. She didn't quit. She marched into the office of Broadway giant David Belasco and demanded a role, eventually changing her name to Mary Pickford. But the real turning point came in 1909 when she lowered herself, in the eyes of theater snobs, to act in flickers or silent movies. She joined Biograph Studios under the legendary D.W. Griffith. In 1 year alone, she appeared in 51 films. She was relentless, versatile, and rapidly becoming the face of a new medium. However, Griffith pushed her. He wanted to extract raw emotion, and in doing so, he inadvertently shoved her toward the first great tragedy of her life. He paired her with an actor named Owen Moore to get her comfortable with romantic scenes. Mary was young, impressionable, and completely inexperienced in matters of the heart. She looked at Owen and saw an escape from her mother's suffocating control. But what Mary didn't know was that by falling for Owen Moore, she wasn't stepping into a romance. She was stepping into a trap that would nearly cost her everything. As she walked toward this forbidden love, she had no idea she was about to commit the biggest mistake of her life, one that would leave her battered, bruised, and terrified in a foreign country. Mary's rebellion against her domineering mother backfired in the most spectacular and painful way possible. In January 1911, thinking she was living out a romantic novel, Mary eloped with Owen Moore. She expected a fairy tale. But the moment the ring slid onto her finger, the fantasy evaporated. She found herself trapped in a horror story, caught between the devil, her new, volatile husband, and the deep blue sea of her mother's potential wrath. For months, she hid the marriage, living a double life that ate away at her insides, terrified to tell the woman who had controlled her every move since birth. The dynamic of the marriage was poisoned from the start by a simple, brutal fact. Mary was a star, and Owen was fading. As Mary's fame skyrocketed, eclipsing him completely, Owen's jealousy curdled into rage. He couldn't handle being Mr. Pickford, so he tried to drown his insecurity in alcohol. The drinking turned him into a monster. The psychological torment soon escalated into physical abuse, leaving the screen's most beloved innocent battered behind closed doors. The breaking point didn't happen in a bedroom, but in the dirty waters of the Hudson River. During a film shoot, a boat nearly struck Mary, sending her into a panic. In the chaos, she believed the person grabbing her, supposedly to help, was actually trying to drown her. That flash of mortal terror snapped something in her psyche. She realized her life was in danger, not just on set, but in her own home. The trauma followed her across the ocean to Cuba, where the pressure finally blew the lid off her secret. On the ship to Havana, Mary couldn't hold it in anymore. She blurted out the truth of her secret marriage to her family. Her mother's face went white with horror, followed by tears. But the real nightmare began when they docked. In Cuba, Owen's insecurity exploded into a drunken rampage. He attacked a stranger, forcing the very mother-in-law he despised to hide him from the police and smuggle him out of the country. It was a fiasco. The marriage was effectively over, yet Mary, ever the pragmatist, didn't divorce him immediately. Instead, she buried her pain in the one thing that never hurt her, ambition. While her personal life was a smoking crater, Mary Pickford's professional life was reaching stratospheric heights that no woman, and few men, had ever touched. She stopped being just an actress and became a tycoon. She understood early on that in Hollywood, you were either the player or the played. Mary refused to be played. She leveraged her popularity to demand astronomical raises, going from earning $10 a day in 1909 to demanding and getting $250,000 per film just a decade later. She was the second highest earner in the entire industry, wielding power that terrified the studio heads. But money wasn't enough. She wanted total control. When the big studios began trying to cap the salaries of stars, Mary made a move that changed Hollywood forever. She joined forces with Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and Douglas Fairbanks to form United Artists. This wasn't just a business deal, it was a revolution. They built their own studio, distributed their own films, and kept the profits. The little girl with the golden curls was now a founding mogul, sitting in boardrooms and dictating terms to the men who once thought they owned her. Yet this power came with a suffocating price. The public didn't want the shrewd businesswoman. They wanted America's sweetheart. They wanted the girl with the golden ringlets, curls that Mary actually hated. She referred to them as golden sausages and despised the hours it took to style them. Those famous locks were a lie, often bolstered by fake hairpieces to look more voluminous. She was a grown woman, a powerful executive, forced to dress up as a virginal waif to please a public that refused to let her grow up. This tension between the woman she was and the character she played created a ticking time bomb within her. She was trapping herself in a gilded cage of her own making. She had the money, she had the power, and she had the adoration of millions. But she was profoundly lonely. Her marriage to Owen was a sham. Her sweetheart image was a costume, and she was desperate for a connection that felt real. She needed an escape, and she was about to find it in the arms of the only man in Hollywood who could match her star power, a romance that would scandalize the nation. The escape Mary desperately needed arrived in the form of Douglas Fairbanks. When they met at a party, it wasn't just a casual introduction, it was a collision of two celestial bodies. Fairbanks was the swashbuckling hero of the screen, brimming with an energy that matched Mary's own hidden intensity. While the world saw them as wholesome icons, privately, they were two people trapped in miserable marriages, suffocating under the weight of their own legends. The connection was instantaneous and dangerous. In Fairbanks, Mary found the one thing she had never possessed, an equal. But this love story was a ticking time bomb for their careers. In the conservative moral landscape of the 1910s, divorce was taboo and adultery was career suicide. Yet, they couldn't stay away from each other. They began a clandestine affair, exchanging passionate letters and stealing moments in the shadows. It was a high-wire act performed without a net. Mary's mother, Charlotte, ever the vigilant guardian of the family business, went into damage control mode. She was so terrified of the scandal destroying the Pickford brand that she allegedly hired a fixer to sweep their tracks, ensuring that no dirty laundry made it to the press. The secrecy began to crack under the pressure of tragedy and patriotism. When Fairbanks' mother died, he collapsed into Mary's arms for comfort, deepening their bond beyond mere physical attraction. Then came World War I. The government asked Hollywood's biggest stars to sell war bonds, throwing Mary Douglas and Charlie Chaplin together on a cross-country tour. The forced proximity made the affair an open secret within the industry. Fairbanks eventually stopped going home to his wife, Beth, who finally had enough. She publicly accused him of infidelity with an unnamed woman, but the public connected the dots. The facade was crumbling. Mary was now cornered. She had to divorce Owen Moore to be with Douglas, but Owen saw his opportunity for one last cruel act. He didn't just want a divorce, he wanted a payout. He held Mary's happiness hostage, demanding a staggering sum to go away quietly. Reports suggest Mary paid him a colossal $1 million, an unfathomable amount of money at the time, just to buy her freedom. She emptied her bank account to purchase a chance at love, believing the hardest part was over. She was wrong. The public backlash was brewing, and Mary was terrified that by choosing personal happiness, she had just signed the death warrant for America's sweetheart. To everyone's shock, the public didn't revolt. They rejoiced. When Mary and Douglas married in 1920, the world decided to rewrite the narrative, casting them not as adulterers, but as the king and queen of Hollywood. They moved into a Beverly Hills hunting lodge and transformed it into Pickford, a 22-room mansion that became the unofficial White House of the West Coast. If you were anyone, from Albert Einstein to Amelia Earhart, from F. Scott Fitzgerald to European royalty, you didn't just visit Hollywood, you visited Pickford. It was the epicenter of glamour, a symbol of the ultimate American dream. However, the view from the top of the mountain is often cold and isolating. Behind the velvet ropes and the lavish dinner parties, the fairy tale was already showing hairline fractures. Mary had traded a violent drunk for a jealous possessiveness. Fairbanks was obsessed with her, but his love was suffocating. He couldn't stand other men even looking at her, and his constant need for attention drained her. The dynamic shifted. Mary, the shrewd business tycoon, often had to play the maternal figure to Fairbanks' eternal boyishness. She was managing an empire and a husband who refused to grow up. But the deepest wound in the marriage was one they never spoke of publicly. They desperately wanted an heir to their kingdom, a child to complete the picture. But the cradle at Pickford remained empty. Dark rumors swirled through Hollywood that the reason for this tragedy lay in Mary's past. It was whispered that during her miserable years with Owen Moore, she had fallen pregnant, and terrified that a baby out of wedlock would destroy her virgin image, was forced to terminate the pregnancy. The procedure allegedly caused permanent damage, rendering her infertile. This secret grief cast a long shadow over the sunny manicured lawns of their estate. Mary had sacrificed her own flesh and blood for her career, and now, despite having the world at her feet, she couldn't buy the one thing she truly wanted. As the roaring 20s roared on, the silence in the hallways of Pickford grew louder. And looming on the horizon was a technological storm that neither Mary nor Douglas could stop. A storm that would strip them of their voices and threaten to tear their dynasty apart. The end of Mary's reign didn't come from a rival actress. It came from a microphone. When talkies arrived, shattering the silence of cinema, Mary Pickford was furious. She viewed sound films as a degradation of the art form she helped invent, famously calling it like putting lipstick on the Venus de Milo. To her, the silent screen was a canvas for pure emotion, where a single look could convey what 1,000 words could not. But the industry didn't care about art. It cared about novelty. Mary was forced to adapt, but she found the early technology stifling, trapping her expressive physicality behind bulky, static recording equipment. She was a goddess being told to speak like a mortal, and she hated every second of it. But there was something she hated even more than the microphone: the curls. For decades, Mary had been held hostage by her own hair. Those golden ringlets were the symbol of her eternal childhood, a shackle that bound her to the role of the innocent girl even as she approached her 40s. She was a grown woman, a studio boss, and a sexual being, yet the public demanded she remain Little Mary. The internal tension became unbearable. She felt like a fraud, parading around in a costume that no longer fit. So with the same cold calculation she used to negotiate contracts, she decided to kill the character that made her famous. She cut her hair. It sounds trivial today, but in the 1920s it was a cultural nuclear explosion. When the news broke that Mary Pickford had bobbed her famous locks, it made the front page of the New York Times. The public went ballistic. They didn't see it as a style choice. They saw it as a betrayal. Fans wrote her letters filled with venom, mourning the death of the girl they loved. Mary had tried to liberate herself, to finally be seen as an adult actress, but the backlash was severe. She had underestimated how much of her power was tied to a fantasy she no longer believed in. This professional crisis bled directly into her personal life. The Pickford fairy tale was dissolving. As her career wobbled, Douglas Fairbanks's own star began to fade. He was an action hero getting too old for the stunts, and his insecurity manifested in wandering eyes. He returned to his old habits of infidelity, finding comfort in women who didn't challenge him. But this time, Mary didn't just sit and cry. She was drinking now, heavily. The alcohol, a demon that had plagued her family for generations, became her primary coping mechanism. The king and queen were still on the throne, but the castle was rotting from the inside out. The divorce came in 1936, shattering the last illusion of Hollywood's golden age. The breakup of Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks was more than just a split. It was the end of an era. They had defined the celebrity power couple, and their failure signaled that even the gods could bleed. Fairbanks drifted away, eventually marrying the woman he had cheated with, but he never truly recovered. When he died of a heart attack just a few years later, Mary received the call late at night. The grief was so overwhelming, so complicated by years of betrayal and lingering love, that she couldn't even bring herself to attend his funeral. She stayed away, sparing his widow the drama, but privately, a part of her died with him. Desperate to fill the cavernous void in her life, Mary made a late attempt at the one role she had missed: motherhood. In her 50s, she adopted 2 children, Ronald and Roxanne, hoping to manufacture the family she never had. It was a disaster. Motherhood is not a role you can simply step into like a costume, and Mary was too damaged, too absorbed in her own fading glory and deepening alcoholism to connect with them. She was critical and distant, retreating into her bedroom with a bottle rather than engaging with her children. The fantasy of a happy family crumbled just as quickly as her marriages had. Fate, it seemed, wasn't done punishing her. The family she had fought so hard to save from poverty began to drop away one by one. Her mother, Charlotte, the architect of Mary's life and her emotional anchor, died of cancer. Then her brother Jack. Then her sister Lottie. Mary was the last one standing, the sole survivor of the Smith family struggle. She had all the money they had dreamed of, but she had no one left to share it with. The wealth that was supposed to bring freedom now only bought her isolation. She still owned Pickford, the legendary palace where she once hosted Einstein and royalty, but the guests stopped coming. The parties stopped. The lights went out. Mary retreated into the master bedroom, slowly transforming into a recluse. She spent her days in bed, surrounded by memories and whiskey, answering the phone less and less. The world outside was changing. Technicolor, television, new stars, but inside Pickford, time had stopped. She was about to enter the final, longest act of her life, the decades of silence. For the last several decades of her life, Mary Pickford became Hollywood's most famous phantom. She locked the gates of her estate and refused to leave, turning the once vibrant palace into a mausoleum for the living. It was a tragic, ironic twist fit for a movie script. The woman who had fought so violently to be seen by the world now couldn't bear to let the world see her. She lived out her days in her bedroom, communicating with the outside world only by telephone, terrified that the public might glimpse the ravages of age on the face that was supposed to remain eternally young. The whiskey bottle became her most constant companion, numbing the silence of a house that used to ring with the laughter of Charlie Chaplin and the footsteps of kings. Yet even in this dark isolation, the poverty-stricken girl from Toronto never completely disappeared. Mary remembered what it was like to be hungry, and that memory drove her to one final redeeming act of power. She didn't hoard her wealth. She used it to build a safety net for others. Remembering the bucket she used to pass around on sets for out-of-work actors, she helped organize the Motion Picture Relief Fund. She poured her fortune into creating a hospital and retirement home for industry workers who had fallen on hard times. She ensured that while she died alone in luxury, the lighting technicians, extras, and forgotten stars who helped build her empire wouldn't have to die in the gutter. This was the ultimate paradox of Mary Pickford. She was a woman who could save everyone but herself. She possessed the business acumen to run a studio, the talent to define an art form, and the heart to care for thousands of strangers, but she lacked the tools to find personal peace. She lingered on until 1979, dying at the age of 87. By the time she passed, the industry had changed beyond recognition, but she remained its silent, suffering matriarch. She had achieved the immortality she sought, but the price was a lifetime of performance that didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. She lived a lie because the truth was too painful to bear. Mary Pickford wasn't just America's sweetheart. That was the marketing pitch. In reality, she was a warrior who wore ringlets like armor. She fought her way out of starvation, battled misogynistic studio heads, and built the very foundations of the celebrity culture we consume today. She sold us a beautiful lie about innocence and happiness, but behind the curtain was a woman composed of steel and scars. She sacrificed her childhood, her marriage, and perhaps even her chance at a family, all to remain on the pedestal we built for her. In the end, her life proves that you can conquer the world and still lose yourself in the process. If Mary's story moved you, or if you were surprised by the darkness behind the golden curls, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think the price of fame was worth it for her? And you absolutely cannot miss my next video. I thought I knew everything about the legends of the silver screen, but my deep dive into the life of Gloria Swanson uncovered secrets that make Mary's story look tame. Click the notification bell so you don't miss it.